Hi, this is Sarah. Thanks for listening to my show, Meant for More Conversations with Sarah Allie Moore, where we explore our greatest potential, the call to serve, and leading heart-centered change with full authenticity. So thanks for joining me tonight, this Tuesday. I hope you're all having a good start to your week. Today I wanted to talk about authenticity, and this is a subject that has been coming up a lot in conversations, with friends, in some of the groups that I run, just running into a lot of conversations around this concept around authenticity. And for those of you who have been following the other talks here on my page that I've had, as I've been interviewing the different speakers from TEDx, Cherry Creek Women, so many of these conversations are centered around or hold an aspect of this idea around authenticity. And my own talk was very central around this subject of authenticity, and centered around the story of my natural hair, of coming to appreciate and love my natural hair. What I was really trying to get to in that talk, and what I hope that people really resonated with, was understanding the risk it takes to be authentic. There are real risks. There is a cost that is present for choosing to be authentic. And when we think about those risks, is there a conversation or is there another thought about how we are creating or adding to, right? Are we creating safety for people to be whole, to be authentic? How are we operating in our own lives when it comes to authenticity and the world around us in order to, open up a way for people to be authentic? It's this buzzword that we use so often, authenticity. I feel like it's like one of those trending terms, hashtag be you, be authentic, right? It's a trending word and a trending hashtag, but authenticity is not a trend, right? Authenticity is the state of being. It's what we should be cultivating everywhere. It's how we should be operating. It's how we should be living. It should be a way of life, authenticity. And yet, in so many ways, society, right, dominant society, dominant culture is constantly devaluing and telling us how we're not enough. And yet, we also are supposed to be authentic, right? And this openness around authenticity. And yet, how safe is it truly to be authentic? And I think when it comes to answering that question, you can look at yourself and ask yourself, how authentic are you showing up in your life? How authentic are you allowing yourself to express who you are? Do you feel safe being authentic? Do you feel as though you can operate in society, in the world around you, with your loved ones? Usually with our loved ones, it feels easier for us to be ourselves. But how many of you don't always feel safe with the people in your life? How many of you recognize that there's still parts of yourself that you hide or that you're not being fully open about because of fear of judgment from the people who you love most, right? And then that translates as well to, our external surroundings outside our homes, outside of our core relationships, right? And how authentic are we allowing ourselves to be in those relationships? I posted a question this morning around, what does authenticity mean to you? And there was so many comments. I really appreciate you guys diving in and exploring this question. What is it to be authentic? For me, I find that authenticity is where your personality
comes into alignment and in integrity with your values, and how you operate from that place, how you allow yourself to speak, to act, to take space, right? To be present. It's really about the state of wholeness. And how much do you feel whole in the different areas of your life, in your core relationships, the relationships that you have in your workplace, in your work environment, right? With acquaintances, with business partners. But most of all, how whole is your relationship with yourself, right? And there were a lot of comments that I really appreciated. For those of you who are joining me, thanks for joining me in this conversation around authenticity. Some of you may have answered that question on my page earlier this morning about what does authenticity mean to you? And I really loved a lot of these responses. Someone said, not changing who you are for a new relationship or new people that you meet. And that's such a great way to think about the ways of which we might be wearing masks when we are meeting new people, the ways that we might not feel comfortable about being ourselves. And it takes courage and openness and vulnerability to allow yourself to be authentic, especially in new experiences where if you grew up, which, I can totally relate to this, in growing up in an environment where you were not often allowed to show up in spaces with public. Like I always had a parent who told me to sit down and be quiet, and behave. Don't do anything. Don't do this, don't do that, and because there would be real consequences, right? And so how many of us have had those childhoods, right? I've had parents telling us how we should and shouldn't act, right? And not allowing ourselves to show up in our authentic expression of who we are. Manners is important, right? So we want to teach our children manners, but there's a difference between, helping to inform what it is to have manners and to be respectful. And it's a whole other way to look at the ways of which we are silencing, children from sharing their authentic expression, right? So coming from that sort of upbringing, that can translate over time, right? As we become adults, how comfortable are we in showing up as ourselves? There was another one here, from Michael, honoring one's truth honestly while remaining open to self-correction and growth. And I loved this part about being open and remaining open to self-correction and growth. That self-inquiry piece. How are we allowing ourselves to be aware of our feelings, how we're feeling, how we're showing up? How are we honoring or giving ourselves permission in doing so, in showing up? And that openness, right? To change, to transform, to get it wrong, but then to want to do more next time, to allow ourselves to be more open, to allow ourselves to be more seen moving forward. Another person wrote, speaking the truth at all times, even when it is painful. And I thought that was a really good response, because it takes such courage to be authentic. It takes such courage to allow yourself to express your feelings and your emotions, especially if they don't fit into the norm or if they might make someone uncomfortable. And even more so, if your truth, right, what you feel like needs to be said, feels scary to say it, that is a huge indicator, right, of the courage that's needed, and possibly to explore what might have been activated, right, from a past experience that you're carrying or harboring that is making it difficult for you to express your truth, right? And when it comes to expressing our truth and authentically, I want to really draw home the part that speaking your truth doesn't have to be something that diminishes, devalues, or takes away from another person's experience. If you feel like speaking your truth has the experience of diminishing another person or creating conflict in a way where a person feels like they're devalued or they've been taken, down, it's really important to think about, is the truth that I am speaking, is that coming from a place of care, right? Is that coming from a place of integrity of who I am and what I want to communicate here? Or is it coming from a part of me that's scared, that's reacting to something because, I'm feeling uncomfortable, right? It's really important to have that self-awareness, that openness to correction, and understanding, where that activation is coming from. Because when we can express our truth is really about being in a state that is loving, that presents an opportunity for a win-win situation, that presents an opportunity to not only be heard, right, but to engage the other person and to call in, right? And the way that we can show up authentically. And as I said, for me, it's about being in alignment with your values, being in alignment with your integrity of your value. If you really think about what are your values, and this is a really important thing that I think everybody should explore for themselves, or what is your number one value? And if you can't whittle it down to one, like, what are your top three? What are the three values that are really important in your life that you want to embody, that you make sure that when you are walking through life, that you want people to remember or feel about you, right? And out of those values is what you are expressing, is how you are acting, is what you are doing in alignment with those values. Really important when it comes to authenticity. And from that place of values, really, those values are shared. And those values should feel really good. They should feel good and they should be received well because our values are shared. And because it comes from that place that's in integrity with our values, the feeling of it really should be one that feels loving, that feels accepting, that feels open, that is calling in versus calling out. So this piece around authenticity and what is it to be authentic is really important to explore for yourself, because when you understand what authenticity truly means from a state of wholeness and operating from that state of wholeness, you recognize the courage that it takes to be whole. And then the question comes up about, how are we creating spaces? How are you creating space for others to be whole? How are you allowing yourself the space to be whole, right? In the ways of which we don't feel safe to be our whole selves, that's where we really need to be looking. That's really where we need to investigate further to understand, what is it that is missing, that does not feel safe, that's creating a risk, right? Or feels like it's risky to show up authentically. That's the work that we need to do. And you can always figure that out by applying it to yourself first. Now, this concept around wholeness, I see it as wholeness is like the highest vision that you have for yourself. I don't know about you, but for a very long time, I would have this, I would see this higher version of myself, right? Of who I was going to be, or the best version of myself who's taking this best step forward. And that is the vision of wholeness. That is who I want to be, right? And how many of you out there are carrying some version of yourself that you want to get to and you feel like you're not there yet? I feel like that's a shared experience so much for all of us. And that comes from the not enough story that that we each are carrying inside of us. If you haven't uncovered those feelings of not being enough, I really encourage you to create some safe space for yourself to explore, any of those feelings that you might be feeling where you don't feel like you're enough, because it's robbing you from your ability to feel whole. And so when we have this emulated version of who we are going to be, right, someday, that's robbing us of the wholeness that we are in this very present moment right now. And wholeness is really about recognizing that emulated version of who you are, this higher version of yourself, is actually who you are right now. But what's happening is that there are ways in your life that you are not allowing yourself to be authentic so that you can be in alignment with that. There's a way where you're operating inauthentically. And that inauthenticity is rooted in the ways of which you might be carrying these feelings like you're not enough, or you need to fix or change, or heal, or make something better about yourself. And I just want to be a voice here that says to you that the highest vision of who you want to be, being a better version of yourself, is accessible to you right now in this moment. But it's about asking yourself, what are your values? And are you in alignment with those values? And most often what you might find is how you're not operating in alignment with those values, that there are ways of which you are diminishing yourself. There are ways of which you are hiding parts of yourself. There are ways where you are not expressing your feelings and emotions, where you're not sharing your truth, right? And when we are in a place like that, and oftentimes that comes from different trauma in our past. And, for me, a perfect example is, I grew up in a home where I dealt with narcissistic abuse. And so I was constantly given very mixed messages about being good and being bad, being right and being wrong. And for the most part, I was always wrong, or I was always bad, or I was never enough for the moment. And it was very confusing, which also led to, falling into relationships with people that created that same confusion. Where it just fed into that feeling of not being enough. And from those traumatic experiences, from that trauma, there's a way of which I had to recognize that there are all these different belief systems that I have that are just not in alignment. And what it was doing is creating all of these coping mechanisms for myself, right? And how this can form is through destructive behavior, really bad inner self-criticism, addiction, reactivity, self-sabotage. And all of that comes from the parts that are split inside of us, where we're not really addressing our truth, where we're seeing ourselves not in alignment with our values, where we are seeing ourselves as not whole. And so the path of wholeness is coming into your authenticity. And when you come into your authenticity, it's really a process of self-compassion, care, deep kindness towards yourself. And as you are doing that for yourself, you also can do that with other people. So much of my TEDx talk, the idea we're sharing, the core message of that was that the most revolutionary act one can do is to love that which they find unlovable. That is the process of wholeness. That is the process of integrating your personality with your values. That's the process of becoming authentic. And when we allow ourselves our authenticity, when we allow ourselves wholeness, we understand and have deep compassion, not only for ourselves, but for one another. and wanting to create more spaces, wanting to create relationships, right, that offer the safety of wholeness, that offer the safety of authenticity, because you begin to recognize how much more liberated you feel in yourself, how much freer you feel moving through your life when you are in alignment with your authenticity. Authenticity also is a huge, huge state that is important for mental health. I think about the ways of which because of that not enough story, because of those feelings of unworthiness, the things that we're harboring because of either trauma, experiences, right, imbalances, because of trauma that we've endured and experienced in our lives, really impacts our emotional well-being, our mental health. And so, again, leads to these destructive habits, self-sabotage, destructive behavior, addictions, right? It creates havoc on our relationships. And the number one driving factor for all of us as human beings is that we want love and belonging, because that's who we are. We want what we are from one another. And because of that longing for that love and belonging, if we're having to deny ourselves our truth in order to fit in, right? If we are denying ourselves experiences, like in my talk, I talk about the ways where for the longest time, I didn't go to the gym, right? Because I was afraid my hair would fall off my head, or I avoided the wind because it might blow off my head. I mean, I could tell you however many things of, things I denied myself, experiences I denied myself out of fear of not fitting in, right? Robbing myself the ability to be authentic. And even more so, if we think about all these different lenses of our lives, right? Me being a transpersonal strategist, I think about these different areas of our lives, whether that's our spiritual well-being, our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, right? The quality of our relationships, how in alignment we are with our passion and purpose, and discovering that for ourselves. All of that is foundational and impacted with whether if we are living in our authenticity, or if we're living inauthentic in our lives. And so being whole, or moving on a path towards wholeness, right? Allowing that self-compassion, giving ourselves permission to be ourselves, the ways that these different areas influence who we are. Having safety is really important to our mental and emotional well-being, and how we create space that's safe for others, right? Mental health, and I'm sure many of you would agree, is an area in our dominant society that is really underrepresented, undersupported. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think that is a huge mirror. It translates to the fact that we might carry a lot of shame for ourselves. We might carry parts of ourselves that we are harboring criticism or judgment around. And the inability of us allowing ourselves our own wholeness and our own openness is translated to the ways of which mental health hasn't really been prioritized in our society, but it's what we need most, right? And I can't tell you how much I appreciate this trend right now, or the conversation that's happening around self-care. What is that show? I love it so much. Parks and Recreation. There's that episode where the treat yourself episode, where it's like they take a day. They take a day to go and just give themselves whatever they want, shop, luxuriate at the spa, go to the finest restaurant, right? Treat yourself, and prioritizing self-care. It's really such an important thing that we should be applying in our own lives, this aspect of self-care, because it allows us to have that openness. It creates spaces for us to feel more open, more vulnerable, right? In honoring ourselves and honoring our needs. For me, a huge part of self-care is, meditation, is having some alone time. We're exploring this right now in my soul storming group, where we are covering the 7 spiritual laws of success by Deepak Chopra. And the first law that we're covering is this law of potentiality. And it really explores how we can tap into our potential and grow that potential, and how we are that potential, and being able to create the outcomes that we want. And what Deepak talks about is, in order to tap into that potential, it's really important to create time for yourself, right? Silence, time where you can actually do that self-awareness, self-reflection, diving in for yourself in order to uncover, right, those false beliefs and discover the potential that exists that you can tap into. All of that is around self-care, which is important to our mental and emotional well-being, right? And how we prioritize our mental health, our emotional health. So we reduce those moments, or those instances of self-sabotage, right? Where we truly can find or uncover ways, right, to deal with our addictions or destructive behaviors, where we can find the help we have, the help that we want, that we need, that we can find the path of recovery for ourselves. So authenticity is really important to that. Then there's also, authenticity in our relationships, which is incredibly important. Right now, I'm running a group, and we're exploring self-love, and exploring the process of self-love, how we can align with and create more love in our lives. And so we're talking a lot about relationships. And what's most important about relationships and our quality of our relationships, the health of our relationships, the state of our relationships, is dependent upon our ability to show up authentically, right? The more authentic, the more we allow ourselves to be ourselves, the more we give ourselves the permission to be whole, right? Where our fulfillment, our contentment, how we feel emotionally, isn't dependent on any other person, place, or thing. That we really have fostered that fulfillment inside of ourselves, right? So we are allowing ourselves the permission to be whole. We're not rejecting parts of ourselves. We're not judging parts of ourselves, that we can actually show up in our relationships more whole. And it is in that wholeness that the quality of that relationship, the health of our relationships, are so much better. I don't know about you, but if you think about the relationships in your life, the people who feel safe for you, right? The people who you can call and express the most embarrassing moments. I have to tell you, I've definitely had some pretty embarrassing moments, and you can be sitting there in your own shame and embarrassment by yourself, right? But that's when having support is really important, because if you have that trusted confidant that you can go to and you can express, what happened, because you know that you're going to be supported. You're not going to be shamed. You're not going to be criticized, right? If you think about that relationship, how safe it feels, how it holds you, right? How it gives you the opportunity for you to show up as your whole self. Like, really feel what that feels like. That's really special. It feels so special, right? That quality, that health, that state, right, of quality in that relationship is because you can show up as your whole self. So authenticity is incredibly important when it comes to our relationships. And most importantly, in our intimate relationships and our relationships with our romantic partners. It's incredibly important for us to be showing up authentically. So one of the conversations, we've had in this group is around the ways of which we go into, like, how many of you are struggling with, have struggled in the past with online dating, or maybe you're struggling with it now. Maybe some of you have turned the apps off because COVID. I get it. But, it's, as we're moving into exploring relationships, so often it's like, okay, I gotta, you get super done up. You gotta put your best foot forward, right? There's ways which you're operating in conversation and, acting a certain way because you gotta present yourself a certain, and all of that is a recipe for disaster. It's so important that if what you want is truly love and belonging, is truly a relationship with another person, it's the best foot forward would be to show up as your regular, normal, full, authentic self. Okay. I get the wanting to feel good. So do what you need to do to feel good, but don't go to this extreme of trying to act a certain way. Right. And even in conversations, so often it can feel awkward, right? Those initial conversations can feel awkward. But I would ask you, does it feel awkward because you are showing up inauthentically? Or have you come being as authentic as you are? Because I will say, from my own experiences, when I allow myself my wholeness and my authentic expression in meeting people, I feel lighter. I'm not so worried about how I'm operating. I let myself talk freely. I ask questions. I'm not trying to operate some sort of way or tread caution. I just allow myself to be myself. It's so much more easier to make a connection with other people and to understand, right, if the connection that you're making with the other person is a good connection when you're showing up authentically. So authenticity is so important in building our relationships. Then the next thing I want to talk about is, how to live authentically in alignment with yourself, right? How you allow yourself wholeness. And the first step I would say is in really writing your wrongs. Like, what are the ways that you have, like, what things about yourself are you criticizing? What parts of yourself do you feel are inadequate or not worthy? And how can you embrace those aspects of yourself? I'll tell you another story here. I was in a relationship with someone that had a lot of incongruencies to it. And I came out of that relationship really feeling like I wasn't worthy, that I wasn't good enough for this relationship. And it was really, really painful and really hard. And then I realized this feeling that I was feeling, that I was like, this isn't me. Like, this isn't me. And I had to explore the feelings of not enoughness. I had to explore that not enough story that I was carrying inside of myself. And what that brought me to was in recognizing or coming to understand that I am enough. I am enough. You are enough. We are enough. The feelings of unworthiness are out of alignment. If feeling that way, it's about figuring out, where did that story come from? because it's not the truth of who you are right now in this moment. And in uncovering that truth for myself, I had this question of, well, what was I attracted to in this other person? What was attractive about them? Because I realized I don't want to create a situation where I feel this way, because there was something reflected back to me that was making me feel like I was unworthy. So I pulled out a piece of paper and I started to make a list of all these things that I was attracted to in this other person. And I sat there and I looked at this list and I was like, what is it? Right? Like, these are things, some of them good qualities, a lot of them qualities that I was like, that's just not me. And then I realized that I am not embracing any of these qualities myself, even the good qualities. Were rooted in my not enough story, right? Those good qualities were things that I didn't feel like I was good enough for, or I didn't have, or I wasn't allowed, right, to be. And so in looking at this list of aspects, I realized, well, these are things that I have rejected, disowned about myself. And as I sat with that list, 3 questions came to mind in order to integrate these aspects, in order to give myself permission to stop rejecting and disowning these parts of myself. Because by having this split, right, having a split, pushing these things away from me is really impeding my ability to be whole, is really creating this way of being of which I wasn't being authentic, where I was really living my life with so much fear. And the 3 things that I asked for each one of these aspects were, what is the belief system that I have about this? What's the origin story? Like, why is this on this list? What do I actually think about it? The second question is, what new belief do I need to make about this, right? Like, how can I change the old belief into one that helps me embrace this rather than rejecting it? And then the third one was, what action can I take, right? So I can live this aspect, or I can embody this aspect, so that I'm not rejecting it from myself anymore. And it was incredibly healing. It was the start of a very deep healing process for me, because that is the process of getting really honest with yourself. When I asked that question on my page, what does authenticity mean to you? Somebody put, I think it was Sophia wrote, she said that authenticity was getting really honest with yourself about yourself. It's the process of getting honest with yourself about yourself. When you do that, it's about looking at these things, right, that you've held judgment against yourself, that you've criticized about yourself, that you've rejected, disowned from yourself, and righting those wrongs, right? You see those things as wrong and making them right. That is the starting point of uncovering your authentic self. Then it's telling your truth. Telling your truth. So much about telling our truth is how we live our boundaries. Another word that is hugely trending is the word about boundaries. And it seems so frightening for most people. You talk about boundaries like, what? It's like a deer in headlight. What? Boundaries? What are you talking about? Right? Because so many of us struggle with boundaries. Why do we struggle so much with boundaries? Boundaries are simply about expressing your feelings, your emotions, how you are feeling in the moment, and giving voice to that, right? That doesn't feel good. This was done. It made me feel this way. I love Brene Brown's, the story that I'm telling myself is, right? Getting really honest about how you're feeling, what your emotions are, so you can have a conversation that says, hey, that's a boundary for me. That doesn't feel good, right? It's about being able to speak our truth. That is the another part of embracing our authenticity. And I think so much about, relationships. In me as a, I call myself now definitely a recovering codependent. And I hate that word. I hate that word codependency because it's so manipulated into this term, right? That we should be shameful of. And these are all just labels to help us have deeper understanding, but they are not who we are, right? Being a recovering codependent is not a label that I carry. I simply say that around to understand or to create meaning, right? To help understanding around what it is I'm talking about. And it's understanding that, I have these aspects that have been people pleasing, right? So in people pleasing, I disown certain aspects of myself, or I don't express certain aspects of myself, or I hide certain truths about myself to make other people more comfortable. But that is denying myself my own authenticity. And so coming into the, space of being free and expressing who I am, right? And giving myself the freedom of that expression has been so transformational in being able to express my truth. It's being able to be in a relationship with someone, right? That when things aren't working, I'm not holding back fear to say, hey, this doesn't work. Hey, I feel like this. Hey, this, I'm noticing X, Y, and Z, right? Rather than people pleasing, I'm expressing and communicating my truth. And then is the other person allowing that as well? Right? And engaging in that is really where we can deepen our relationships, where we can engage with conflict that allows us to deepen trust, right? Because we can overcome, we can understand other people's boundaries and learn how to love people, the way they need to be loved, and how to ask to be loved the way we need to be loved. It's all that boundaries are, is really how we enact our love with one another. So telling your truth is so incredibly important and really is at the heart of what boundaries are. Then there's taking inventory of what's out of alignment. So just like I was explaining about coming to understand those rejected and disowned aspects of yourself, right? As you come to understand those things, really, you begin to move in greater alignment with yourself. That's your authentic self, your true self, how you're walking in the world whole. And then taking those actions towards embracing yourself, towards embracing who you are. There is a really important way to think about our actions and our values, our actions and our beliefs. And are they in alignment with one another? For example, if you say that what you want most is to be loved, and yet you behave in ways that are unloving, then your actions and your behavior don't align, right? And that's why I talk so much about the inner critic or that not enough story, because it has us operating inauthentically. It has us operating in our lives. We are not allowing ourselves our wholeness. We're not embracing who we are because our behavior is damaging. It's going against what we say we actually want. So, in this example of what you want is love, but yet you're constantly criticizing yourself for self-harming or, doing destructive behavior, or perhaps you have those heart walls up, right? And you're pushing people away, which is really hurtful for the person on the other end, right? Those heart walls, right? Keeping yourself blocked. All of that, all of those behaviors are functioning as a defense mechanism for sure, but they're not congruent with what it is you actually say you want. And so authenticity is finding the path to give yourself the permission where your actions and your beliefs can align, where you can really embrace yourself. What are the things that you need to embrace about yourself, right? What are the things that you need to stop rejecting and disowning? How do you need to be honest with yourself and with the people in your lives about where you are? How can you communicate what you need? How can you communicate your boundaries? How can you communicate your wants, your needs, your desires? Are you giving yourself permission to do that? All of that is the process of aligning your actions with your beliefs, coming into that state, allowing yourself wholeness, allowing yourself that state of authenticity. So I want to end with some questions that you might explore for yourself if you're, as you're listening to this, when we're done with this conversation tonight, is to sit down and explore some questions. And for those of you who are listening tonight, tomorrow I will be adding a worksheet to it with these questions to explore for yourself. So you can get in touch with your true, authentic self that wants to come forward, right? And maybe uncover some of those blocks, some of those things that are getting in the way, or what I say, what you're hiding from. What is it you're hiding from yourself? So some of the questions that you might explore are, is there an attribute or behavior about yourself that you rely on in order to feel safe or valuable? If so, what is that? What is that attribute? Who might you become if you choose to let that go and stop relying on it? What is one thing you wish people knew about you that they don't see? What do you think would happen if you allowed them? Most of all, how might you impact others around you? How might you impact the world around you by allowing yourself to be yourself? What does that look like? How would that be important? Again, so much of what I'm talking about here is really recognizing, one, the amount of courage and bravery it really takes to own your authenticity and to recognize the risks that are involved. The reason why you feel so scared, right, is because there's a risk that you're taking. What are the consequences? And in the way you know the consequences for yourself, think about the risk it takes to be authentic for the people around us, in the world around us. You know, so much of the conversation on my hair, understanding there are consequences for me wearing my natural hair. Some people might not like this. I might be racially profiled. I might be targeted, discriminated against. I might lose out on a job opportunity. This is real. This is real world consequences, right? For the LGBTQ plus community, right? As a queer BIPOC woman, what are the consequences, that people face for the love that they want in their lives, right? For the partners that they choose to have. They're just trying to live their life. They want to be authentic and whole, just like you want to be authentic and whole. Recognizing those risks, recognizing the consequences, recognizing those costs is really important because it can help us care about the spaces that we are creating, around the relationships that we are creating, about the way that we are connecting with our society within the dominant culture, right? On wanting to create more safety around authenticity. We're allowed to be whole. You're allowed to live your life in wholeness. You're allowed to have, you deserve to have, you're worthy of relationships where you feel whole. So things to think about. And again, if you want to navigate these questions on your own, again, I'll have a worksheet that you can sign up for on my website, sarahalliemore.com, and explore these questions for yourself. And then I'd love to hear from you personally, what you think, what you're feeling, what's coming up for you as you're doing these things. I really want to thank you for joining me tonight and, diving into this subject of authenticity. And I know that I'll continue to talk about authenticity. We have a conversation next week where we're going to dive into that not enough story, unworthiness, reinventing your life and your career around your passion, how you can shed the feeling of or the lack of confidence and move into your power of confidence around what it is you want to do, be, build. All of those things. And so much of that is also tied to authenticity. So, this conversation is going to carry, I'm sure, through many conversations that you'll find here meant for more conversations. And I really thank you for listening tonight and have a great rest of the week. I'll see you next week for the next episode. And we're going to dive into how do you reinvent your career? How do you get in alignment with your purpose, passion, and really dismantle that not enough story? All right. So have a good night, everyone, and I will see you then. Bye.